I will give my presentation on theories of social change, which always contain a strong historic moment. And it's very interesting because sociology itself began with telling great stories about, first of all, the modern world. And every thinking about social change somehow presupposes the need that we try to orientate ourselves in history, that our orientation is based on temporality and movement. This is a very interesting presupposition, which is more and more given up nowadays, but it is a deeply pregnant and even today motivating presupposition that we should find the story behind us, the story which led to the point where we are now. And this story contributes in this way to our self-understanding. And the question will be always, what is the meaning of this situation in which we are? What can we, how is it to use? This is the normative aspect, of course, of history. Is it a history which gives orientation to personal life or to social life, or is it something which becomes for individuals nowadays more and more irrelevant? So what is the sense of historical change? This seeking of meaning or an inner order in changes stands at the beginning of sociology. I would like to mention that this kind of self-understanding has biblical roots, as it is developed very richly by the Egyptologist Jan Assmann, who wrote a book on the Exodus story, where he retells us again the great release story, which is in his eyes the foundation story of our modern self-understanding, even for our modern self-understanding. It is very interesting that even Plato tells us stories. Maybe the most known one is the cave story, the allegory of the cave, about gaining true insight into the essence of the world and of everything. It is told in the frame of a story, a narrative. But it is often said that our self-understanding and our historical consciousness was built and developed in modernity, where temporality was somehow experienced more concretely. Great changes led to the feeling and conceptions that we have to understand the novelty of our stance, which will become modernity. To understand modernity means to understand this novelty. What is new? What is really new in the modern world? And let us now take a look on influential visions of history from sociologists which have the impact even today on social thinking and our general thinking as well. I would like to mention, first of all, Auguste Comte, who named sociology and who divided sociology into two great parts. One of it is statics, sociological statics, and the other one, the other area of area of sociology is social dynamics. Nowadays, we would say structure and change. And it is very interesting that in his understanding, sociology has to do with great changes, with one great change, and every structure is somehow embedded into this great change. And this great change has a specific law, as it is well known, the law of the three stages in history. This is a great attempt to understand history alongside with rationality. One aspect of humanity, maybe for the modern self-understanding, one of the most important aspects, that we are rational beings, and the modern world is somehow specifically rationalized. This idea of the Aufklärung had, or enlightenment, had its great impact, of course, on this construction, where he develops a view of history from the beginning to his age in three stages. And the three stages are stages of the development of human thinking. And now we are in a situation where we are able to grasp the real structure and the real movements of the world, because we are on an empirical fundament. But the problem in Comte, as it is known for himself too, is that the law of the three stages can't be gained on an inducive way, through induction. It is somehow an insight that he receives by night. It's a very interesting moment. However, the most important consequence for every social thinking later will be that they have to deal with novelty, they have to deal with modernity, and they have to deal with changes. And the beginning of modernity is one of the central questions of every sociology. As it is known for Karl Marx, the social history can be reduced on one single principle, which is at the very core of reality. And this reality is a dynamical one. And according to this dynamical reality, the principle itself is a dynamical one. It is alienation. Alienation. It is a great world historical process which began at the beginnings. It is again a deeply biblical idea. At the beginnings, we had alienation, or we had private property, which is the same for him, or which becomes the same for him. Everybody who wants to grasp the present and who wants to foresee the future has to look deeply into the being And this being is a moving one, is a moving being, a dialectical movement, and from there we have to gain the correct and true concept, the true concept of man and of being and of society and so on. And from here on, we can develop even a theory of the epochs of the world, which is well known for everybody. The absolute look, the absolute perspective to reach this absolute knowledge is for Marx the social point or social position, which is the closest for the unfolded man. This place is as it is known again, this place is the place of the proletariat. The whole work of Marx tries to unfold this story more concretely and going into the details. In history, up to the present, it's a quotation, it is certainly an empirical fact that some separate individuals have, with the broadening of their activity into world historical activity, become more and more enslaved under a power alien to them, a power which has become more and more enormous and in the last instance turns out to be the world market. But it is just as empirically established that by the overthrow of the existing state of society, by the communist revolution and the abolition of private property, which is identical with it, this power will be dissolved, and that then the liberation of each single individual will be accomplished in the measure in which history becomes transformed into world history. Only then will the separate individuals be liberated from the various national and local barriers, be brought into practical connection with the material and intellectual production of the whole world, and be put in a position to acquire the capacity to enjoy this all-sided production of the whole earth. For Marx, from this situation and from the true and correct insight into the laws of world history, we can have the criteria of true actions, of practice, thinking and being come together for him, and that gives the norms. This kind of historical movement gives the norms even for our actions today. What concerns the birth of modernity, it is a very interesting story again, but we're not quoted. This story of the primitive accumulation of capital, which is at the beginning of the modern world, expropriation and so on. This is again a great story which is retold even in schools nowadays. So everybody knows this kind of story, whether it is expropriation of the great masses by enclosures or whatever of the what other aspects can may be. The story is well known. I will turn to Max Weber, who tried to give a historical account of history. In his understanding, history is temporality and contains contingency. The social scientific interest has its point of departure in the real that is concrete, individually structured configuration of our cultural life in its universal relationship, which are themselves no less individually structured, and in its development out of other social cultural conditions, which themselves are obviously likewise individually structured. The ideal type, the instrument of grasping history, is an attempt to analyze historically unique configurations on the individual components by means of genetic concepts. Genetic concepts. Let us take, for instance, the concepts church and sect. If I wish to formulate the concept of sect genetically, that is with reference to certain important cultural significance which the sectarian spirit has had for modern culture, certain characteristics of both become essential because they stand in an adequate causal relationship to those influences. So it is, so to say, a kind of reconstruction, of historical events which are in a causal interaction with each other, or causal relation with each other. One of the most important and maybe the best known story of the birth of the modern world is the story about Protestant ethics and the spirit of capitalism. I quote again: Christian asceticism, at first fleeing from the world into solitude, into monastery, had already ruled the world which it had renounced from the monastery and through the church. But it had on the whole left the naturally spontaneous character of daily life in the world untouched. Now it strode in modernity, it strode into the marketplace of life, slammed the door of the monastery behind it, and undertook to penetrate just that daily routine of life with its methodicalness, to fashion it into a life in the world, but neither or nor for this world. So this is the great break in history, which leads to a new shape of man, a new shape of individuality. So it is somehow the birth partly the birth of the modern man, who wants to live his life in a methodical and concentrated way. Firstly, according to salvation categories, and later on according to other more secular centers. Later on, 15 years later, Weber puts another passage, a very interesting passage, into this text, where he opens up a history or a horizon of 3,000 years. That overarching process in the history of religion, the disenchantment of the world, found here with the doctrine of predestination its final stage. This development, which began with the prophecy of ancient Judaism in the Old Testament, rejected, in conjunction with Greek scientific thought, all magical means to the quest for salvation as superstition and sacrilege. This is the greatest story of disenchantment, the well-known story of disenchantment. Every historical understanding is only possible through or by the means of genetic concepts. That means by concepts which entail somehow the birth of the phenomenon we are analyzing. It has to entail the birth, the beginning. And then lastly, I turn to Niklas Luhmann, who was the most radical one and the most consequent one in the field of so to say, destroying this idea of historicity, or this giving up history as a central fate, as a central line, which can give coherence, real coherence, for humanity. His system theory is a functionalist idea, or is based on a functionalist idea, and the logics of it is borrowed from evolutionism, but it is not evolutionism a la Darwin. It is a specific one: variation, selection, and restabilization. These are the three stages of the movements of systems. There are real systems in the world, as he states. We have systems in the world, and every system tries to reduce the complexity of the world, and these reductions lead the essence of it, or the meaning of it, that is that these reductions lead to more effective solutions, not in the adaptation to the environment, because environment is outside of the system. It is every system is a closed system, in the sense that the operations are going on inside the system, and they have directly nothing to do with the environment itself. Environment is always outside. So it is a self-sustaining movement. These three phases movements, variation, selection, and restabilization. There is no end of this story or these mechanisms. There is no telos in the classical sense as it was used by Karl Marx. There is no interest to understand ourselves in this process. It is not the intention of Luhmann to understand modern human being, the state of affairs, to give normative help for human life. It is somehow highly ironic. That means a very distantiated look on the world, on the history, which is not history in the classical sense, because it is just functioning, nothing else. There are no stories, there are no history lines in these seemingly historical movements. They are timely movements, but they are not our history, because it has its inner logic, which goes on according to the logics, variation, selection, and restabilization. And it is not our understanding of, not our self-understanding. It is not the understanding of history, how we understand history, how we construct the scheme of history is another one. Is causality and coming before and after, and this is a totally other logic. And for Luhmann, this is the reality of the world, what we observe from the outside, but they are real systems. As the birth of modernity is concerned, Luhmann formulates as follows: in the social science literature dealing with Europe's special path since the Middle Ages, hence with the origins of modern society, factor theories confront one another that single out religion, economics, political state building, or law. When considering the Middle Ages, the differentiation of functional systems has clearly been the schema to assert itself. Where a primary factor is postulated, the relevance of others is recognized and attributed to it. Immanuel Wallerstein, for example, takes the segmentation of the European world of states to be a consequence of the international division of labor in economy. Max Weber derives the premise of religious orientation from a need to legitimate unleashed economic motives. More recent authors give primacy back to politics and see the decisive factor in the prevention of empire building and the segmentary territorial state order of the political control force. Instead of all these solutions, he sees the starting point of modernity, the birth of modernity in the unfolding differentiation process, which produces several independently functional systems. This is somehow an evolutionary achievement. A theory of social evolution renounces causal explanations. It replaces the causal scheme by the assumption of circular evolutionary conditions. In every historical situation, society is a non-trivial historical machine, which uses variation, selection, and restabilization in accordance with the momentary given state of affairs. What matters is only that these evolutionary mechanisms can be separated, and this requires a minimum of complexity in the system. It tends to be a neutral description of the world. Functioning should be a neutral observation. This is not a story. Stories are interesting for historians. Here we don't have any historical coherence, and this is not the point, even for human beings. For modern human beings, historical coherence does not have any relevance anymore. The problem is, and Luhmann, of course, is aware of this problem, that man is somehow outside of all the systems, outside of all the political or social systems, and outside even of his psychic system. So somehow remains man an environment of every systems, as he formulates it. That means that when the systems are differentiated and there is a dissolution process, then it means for human beings too that they are somehow dissolved. They become more and more differentiated, and at last the greatest life problem is to be seen in this being outside, that we are not part of anything anymore, and even our personal thinking is not able to handle with this complexity. As an end, I would like to stress that somehow for sociological and social theories, it seems to be important that cultures and societies have great stories, foundation stories, which tell and retell ourselves. Even theoretical thinking has this hang to narrativity. Even theoretically, the most abstract thinking has this hang to narrativity, as it can be seen by Luhmann, for example. We have somehow a historical attitude to the world, which has been, of course, developed in the Western culture, and it is somehow our modern self-understanding and our modern striving somehow to gain unity in our life according to stories, even to stories, according to principles, according to aesthetic aspects. But this seems to be very important to fit ourselves into stories, to fit our life into greater stories. Thank you very much.
So, is there a question? Van kérdés magyarul vagy angolul?
I have one.
Okay.
Just to like further your thought on the last word you said, that it is like our future to thrive is to create these grand stories. But before that, you just said that it is a very Western idea to create these grand stories. But then, is it really possible to create these grand stories? Because it seems like a bit of a paradox to say that the only way forward is through these grand stories, which I do believe in. Of course, like it is like how the system itself functioning. But at the same time, if we acknowledge that the realities in which we live in is very diverse, then it is possible ever. I mean, just your thought on it, it's something.
It's a great question for me whether it has been ever possible.
Yeah.
But the striving itself seems to be there, or this strive itself, this intention, or this pretension of human beings that we go back again and again to stories. And they can be even episodic stories, but every episodic story is somehow, even if not coherently, but is somehow embedded into greater and greater stories. Stories are not coherent. They are somehow, I would say, with the word of Max Weber, they are somehow, he puts it in German, Sinnzusammenhänge, contexts or sets of meaning, but they are not coherent. They are sometimes historical, sometimes theoretical. The intention seems to be that because human life itself seems to have a narrative structure in itself, or a historic constitution in itself, that some cultures, the Western culture, tries to develop humanity according to this pattern.
It's rather the motivation to create.
Rather the motivation to create. Thank you very much.